Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in and completely shatter a promise the internet keeps making you. You know the posts I'm talking about, right? The ones claiming that trauma somehow turns you into this untouchable IQ genius. That pain magically rewires your brain into a superpower, making you way smarter than everyone around you. Well, I'm just gonna level with you. That's completely false. No way. Trauma doesn't bump up your IQ points or hand you some rare mystical intelligence. But actually, the real truth about how adversity rewires us, it is so much more fascinating than the myth.
Okay, let's really dive into this. While going through absolute hell doesn't make you book smart, it does something incredibly real. Something scientists have literally spent decades measuring. It completely changes how you read the world. It fundamentally rewires what you notice, what you fear, who you let in, and what you're willing to fight for. It builds these deeply layered, complex adaptations. And here's the wild part. Some of those changes, as incredibly painful as they are to go through, can quietly turn into the absolute most valuable things about you.
Which brings us to Section 1, the myth versus the reality.
Look, the psychological changes we're going to talk about today, they are not magic gifts. They aren't some cosmic prize handed out to make up for your suffering. In science, we just call them adaptations. These are raw, profound survival mechanisms that your mind painstakingly built when it had absolutely no other choice. It did what it had to do to keep you safe. And as we go through this explainer together, keep this in mind. Every single one of these earned mechanisms carries immense value, but also a really heavy cost.
All right, moving on to Section 2, scanning the world, perception, and empathy.
So have you ever walked into a room and just instantly felt that two people were arguing before you even got there? You can literally feel the tension in the air. That's not some mystical intuition at play. Psychologists call it hypervigilance. See, when a child grows up in a really unpredictable environment, the brain's alarm system, specifically this little almond-shaped part called the amygdala, gets hyper-tuned to instantly spot threats. Brain imaging actually shows that childhood adversity creates a massive spike in reactivity to angry or fearful faces. Your brain learned to instantly catch a tightening jaw, a quick glance away, or even just a tiny shift in someone's breathing. Why? Because catching it early once kept you safe.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sharp contrast here, the strength. You have this intensely earned capacity to read people and instantly gauge your room's vibe. But man, the cost is massive. This isn't some Marvel superpower. It's a smoke detector that is literally stuck in the on position. It fires off these exhausting false alarms that can leave you totally drained and anxious in spaces that are actually perfectly safe. It's not a flaw in you, I promise. It's just a brilliant alarm system that never learned the fire is actually out.
You know, the exact same dynamic applies to empathy. We see all these comforting online stories claiming that suffering automatically makes you a super compassionate angel. And to be fair, researchers Daniel Lim and David DeSteno did run studies showing that survivors of severe adversity do often feel more compassionate for others in pain. They actively step up and help more. But we have to be totally honest about the cost here. For folks with chronic long-term trauma, especially from childhood, empathy can actually get blunted or kind of scrambled. There was a study on women with childhood PTSD, and it found that while they felt intense personal distress seeing someone in pain, they actually had a much harder time stepping directly into that person's shoes. It's not just this clean, beautiful gift, right? It's a highly complicated capacity that you've had to cultivate.
And this completely changes how you analyze people, too. Because figuring out the adults around you was once the literal difference between a calm day and a terrible one. Your mind just became a pattern-matching machine. Now, when someone treats you poorly, your first move might not even be anger. It's a question. Okay, what happened to them? You become deeply forgiving because you're always digging for the wound underneath the bad behavior. But the flip side? You carry that heavy, deep analysis everywhere you go. You see the deep loneliness hiding behind a loud laugh at a party, and it becomes practically impossible to just switch your brain off and take people at face value.
I want to pause right here for a second, because this is absolutely crucial. The biggest lie currently spreading on all these pseudoscientific internet platforms is that having high sensitivity is just proof of a trauma wound. They try to tell you that being overwhelmed by bright lights, loud noises, or absorbing other people's moods means you're damaged. Well, honestly, they've got this entirely wrong.
Take a look at this chart. This is based on decades of hard research by psychologist Elaine Aron. She studied this trait called sensory processing sensitivity. And guess what? It turns out about 15 to 20% of the population is just born with this temperament. born with it. It's deeply genetic, and we even see it across the animal kingdom. It is absolutely not caused by trauma. Now, sure, a harsh environment can interact with it, but the sensitivity itself, that came first. It's not a scar you picked up, it's literally just how you were built.
All right, let's move into section 3, the internal defense system: trust, rest, and chaos. So, why is it that survivors build trust so incredibly slowly? Well, a researcher named Jennifer Frey developed something called betrayal trauma theory to explain exactly this. The core idea is devastatingly simple. When the people we depend on for survival, especially when we're little, turn out to be the ones who hurt us, it completely reshapes our concept of trust from the ground up. If your primary protector was actually the danger, your brain literally wires itself to believe that trust, in and of itself, is hazardous. So, what do? You build a filter. Your strength becomes your ability to run these quiet, ultra-careful background checks on someone's character before you ever let them get close. But the cost is that you build these massive, impenetrable walls that end up locking out genuinely safe people. Keeping that heavy armor on 24/7 can make true closeness feel like this wild, unnecessary risk, way after the actual danger has passed. And the crazy thing is, that armor stays firmly on even when you're completely alone in your own house. Let me ask you this. Why is it that finally sitting down on the couch to just relax suddenly floods your brain with a million unfinished tasks and this overwhelming sense of dread? Why does doing absolutely nothing sometimes feel so much worse than being frantic and busy? The scientific answer is hyperarousal. See, in a highly unpredictable past, quiet usually wasn't peaceful. It was the eerie silence right before a disaster struck. So your brain learned a really brutal rule. You are only safe when you are alert, moving, and in control. This chronic stress leaves your nervous system completely dysregulated, just endlessly revving its engine long after the threat is in the rearview mirror. Honestly, learning how to actually feel safe while resting is one of the hardest things for a survivor to practice, simply because stillness historically meant danger. So you mix this lack of trust with an inability to rest, and what do you get? A fierce, incredibly stubborn independence. If no one reliably showed up for you back then, your mind naturally concluded, okay, I guess I'm the only person I can ever count on. You've always got a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. The strength there is your unmatched resourcefulness. But the cost? It's breaking under the sheer weight of carrying the whole world on your shoulders alone. The real growth here isn't about suddenly becoming overly dependent on everyone. It's about realizing that letting the right, safe people help you isn't a weakness. Now, despite all these really heavy costs we've talked about, there is a fascinating capacity that can emerge from the chaos. Psychologist Donald Meichenbaum introduced this concept called stress inoculation. It's basically the idea that manageable small doses of stress can build up your coping skills. It acts almost like a vaccine for the mind. And researcher Mark Siri actually tracked this. He found this amazing bell curve where people who had some moderate adversity in their past actually coped significantly better with new stress than people who had lived perfectly sheltered lives with zero stress. So the absolutely crucial point here is that the old saying, "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger," is kind of just a myth when we're talking about a massive, overwhelming flood of hardship. Honestly, trauma usually just hurts. But if you experienced a moderate amount of adversity, or you fought hard to process your past, you might find yourself possessing this cold clarity and perfect order when everyone else around you is completely panicking. That ability to steady your breathing and become the anchor in the middle of a storm, that is a genuine, incredibly hard-earned capacity.
Which leads us perfectly into section 4, the moral compass, justice and meaning.
Notice how so many survivors literally cannot look away when they see a bully or spot an injustice. Scientists call this justice sensitivity, and it's deeply tied to something known as moral injury, which is this profound wound you get from witnessing violations of your core sense of fairness. But here's the magic. When this sensitivity points outward, when you use it to protect others who can't defend themselves, it becomes this unstoppable force. It's a finely tuned moral compass, and it was shaped by knowing exactly how devastating the true cost of unfairness really is. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate choice that every survivor faces. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Nazi concentration camps, famously wrote that even when absolutely everything is stripped away from you, you still retain the ultimate freedom, the freedom to choose your response. He consciously chose to find meaning even in his suffering. He didn't let the unspeakable cruelty he faced make him cruel in return. Instead, he actively, defiantly turned that horror into deep purpose.
Bringing us to our final section, Section 5, Post-Traumatic Growth, Building from the Scars.
This incredible human capacity for purpose leads us to the ultimate scientific resolution. Researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun identified a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. They found that more than half, over half, of trauma survivors actually report profound positive life changes down the road. Deeper appreciation for life, tighter relationships, and an entirely new sense of personal strength. But listen to me closely, because this is the part those inspirational internet memes always skip over. Growth is not a reward for suffering. The trauma was never ever worth it. Post-traumatic growth is so much quieter and so much braver than that. It is the active, exhausting, deliberate rebuilding of meaning out of something that tried to completely break you. The pain was not the gift. What you built from it, that is.
Surviving a harsh past didn't hand you some secret magical intelligence. What it gave you was a complex, heavily textured reality. You earned the ability to read a room in seconds, to feel deeply for others, to stay ice-cold calm in the fire, and to fight relentlessly for fairness. You carry both the deep, heavy scars of what you survived and the incredible, undeniable strength of what you actively chose to become afterward. The only question left is, which one of those are you going to point at the world today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really encourage you to keep exploring how you can use all those hard-earned adaptations to build the exact life you deserve. Catch you next time.